If Wizards of the Coast has its heart set on rebuilding their empire, all they have to do is look at their past successes and get the wheels in motion. Companies that want success and want it bad will look at past successful business plans they've enacted and they'll try to replicate it and make it happen again. Welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here, and thank you again for hanging out with me on the channel today. When you look at great Magic sets in the last few years, look at things like Ikoria, go ahead, even take a look at Kamigawa and Neon Dynasty. Look at the mana base of those sets. Look at the success of individual cards inside that set, and when Wizards of the Coast wants to kind of shore things up and make sure they do well, they give you a strong mana supply. They give you something special. And when they really want to hit on something, they also pack in the nostalgia factor. What I mean is when you look at the most powerful cards in Magic, it all starts with mana. And when you go back to the old Magic cards, a lot of those cards are so broken by today's standards in the reserve list that people just, like, they say you can't play them, they're banned, or really I don't think they are. But a lot of people feel that way. And a lot of players love seeing old names or ideas come back around. I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of cards on the reserve list today. But I want you to also think about how these cards are going to relate, because that's what I'm going to explain to you, how I think these cards can come back around or already have, and which cards you can expect to see coming up in future sets, because Wizards wants banger success. They will go back to previous successful sets. They will look back on old cards that players just talk about and have that attachment to, and they'll look at new fundamental ways of getting those cards back into sets in a new form or design. Let's check this out. Let's get the party rolling, because some of these cards are so valuable that they're gonna get heads turning if they're reintroduced in a new way into modern sets. Ever since Wizards of the Coast introduced amazing land cycles in cards, they've tried to replicate this idea, sometimes with success, but a lot of times with failure. This is Ice Age's Timberline Ridge, a whole series of dual lands based on depletion counters. If there are any depletion counters on Timberline Ridge, it does not untap during your untap phase. Guys, pretty scary stuff. And every time you tap it, it gets a depletion counter. So you basically only use lands like this every other turn. Wizard tried to do a couple of times, bring these cards back around. They never really met with that kind of success. Even though there's ways of taking depletion counters away and ways of removing these, it takes a lot of effort to make cards like this work. So Wizards of the Coast avoids cards like this that slow the game down. So you're not likely to see these kind of cards, the cards with the depletion counters on them, ever come back around. Wizards wants success, not failure. So a card like this has low value, but at the same time, the more cards Wizards puts out that removes counters, I think there was a couple of new ones that came up in the Brothers War, like some kind of angel that you can remove counters from something to give card draw and +1/+1s. They can make cards like this work technically, but it takes a lot of effort to make it happen. Remember that. This is not something Wizards is really going to focus on. Now, when you look at a card like Lake of the Dead from Alliances, now, this kind of epic nostalgic art from back in the day, you just don't see anymore. It's very creepy, eerie, but so beautiful at the same time. These kinds of cards, which are from the Alliance block era, these are the kind of things that can get your Eldrazi going. They work in Tron decks when built correctly. Mana pumping chaos. And they have given us cards of this ilk. They brought this kind of stuff back around when they gave us cards like Cabal Coffers, okay? Giving us similar cards with a more narrow focus. Those kinds of lands built off of the idea of Lake of the Dead are the kinds of cards they'll bring back around, but it's also why a card like Lake of the Dead is so powerful. And although it's on a downward trend right now, this card was over $300. The fact you can get it for like $70 moderately played just tells you where they're going with this kind of stuff. They know they can't replicate the exact card without breaking the reserve list, which is why sales on this card will always continue. But at the same time, they will try to find ways to work around the idea of the card, give it to the players in a watered down fashion that will drive sales in certain sets that they want to guarantee success in. Remember cards like this because they will come back around. Now, City of Shadows. One of my all-time favorite cards from the Dark because I used to play with it all the time. And this card, when you look at it, it itself does not tap for mana alone. And a lot of old mana-based lands don't do that, which is why we have cards now that come into play tapped. We have all kinds of other effects, watered-down versions of cards like this. Sacrifice one of your creatures, but remove it from the game instead of placing it in your graveyard. Put a counter on City of Shadows. X and tap. X colorless mana to your mana pool, where X is the number of counters on City of Shadows. So I myself still use this card in some commander decks. I sack with blocked creatures, put them onto the City of Shadows, build up my mana supply, and do crazy things late in the game. They tried this in Fallen Empires by giving us like these storage kind of lands where you keep them tapped, and you can put a storage counter on it, and they're one-time kind of effects, but these kind of lands can come back around in different variation or different versions where you sack and gain some kind of benefit from the land, which is why you need to pay attention to cards like this because they're not going to replicate them. They're not coming back around as long as the reserve list is in place. Instead, it'll be a walk-around version, some kind of easier plus-minus effect. We'll give you something good, but you got to lose something, okay? You're going to lose some life. You're going to lose a different thing so they can make this land work in modern formats. But these ideas always come back around. R&D knows when they built this game, they built these cards the best the first time. They didn't build up to it. They didn't have experience. Richard Garfield's original iteration of the game was a standalone epic tale of power. And that's where we had the game. That's why it's so amazing to look back on these cards and realize Wizards is just trying to copy what they've already done. It gives them success when they do it correctly. I love seeing watered down versions of the cards when they're built right. Now here is Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Legends card, guys. Look at the price. $4,000 plus, okay? You can find beat up copies and stuff for cheaper, but there's a reason why. All creatures now require an upkeep cost of 1. In addition, any other upkeep costs they may have. If the upkeep cost for creature is not paid, destroy the creature. Okay. Now back in the day, this thing didn't see a lot of play. But with cards like the Abyss and other cards you factor in with this, along with the fact they've actually copied this card as an enchantment, like Mists of Pendrell Vale, which is also a reserve list card. Wizards doesn't like cards that slow down the game now. They want to speed things up. But once in a while, like Magnus of the Veil, they give us variations of this card still to bring back that nostalgia, to bring back the idea of the change up that brewing can happen in other formats. They don't like to put it in standard, but they do put it into things like Modern Horizons sets, right? Well, Modern Horizons 2 had some of these new cards entering. This is the idea. Like Gaia's Cradle had us go to, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, right? Those kind of cards come back around in a different kind of iteration. But when you look at the original, there's a reason why this power level will never be replicated in Magic, and it's the sheer awesome power it brings to a set. But I think what Wizards has gotten wrong is they rotate these sets out. It's only a problem for 2 years. So really, Wizards should get to producing more powerful cards because they've only got to deal with it for a very limited time. And they could add different variations to the rules saying, some kind of new Legends rule that says you can only have one of these in your deck, right? They just haven't enacted those type of effects yet, but it doesn't mean they can't. If they want a banger hit, that's the kind of things they'll be looking to do. Now, old sets like Arabian Nights had multiple lands that gave crazy effects. And this is one of them. This is Elephant Graveyard, which back in the day didn't really mean much to us because there wasn't a lot of elephants or mammoths and stuff. Tap to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Or regenerate an elephant or mammoth. Now, this card is so powerful for so many reasons. It taps for mana, which is amazing unto itself, with no drawbacks. Just a colorless mana, great. But when you put this, especially later on when I saw people had 4 of these in decks with like a mammoth-built creation of all kinds of elephants and mammoths of various things with all kinds of ways of pumping them up, it's disgustingly powerful what these cards can do. And the fact that Wizards hasn't replicated these yet is probably because they don't like a lot of regeneration. But at the same time, they could bring in something that puts those regeneration counter shield tokens. They could bring back a land that gives a shield token. It still won't be as the as good as the original, but it could still be that watered down version that has a game effect, or maybe it comes into play with 3 counters on it. You can tap and put a counter on a creature that's in play. They have options available, and they will look back at ideas that have worked in the past. That's what they do. The good old Arabian Nights again. Good old, I don't know, whack whack. I just love saying that. Market value, $450, guys. An expensive card, but before 2021, $30-40. It's only the buyouts and people who collect Arabian Nights that really shot this card up to value, because this is one of those lands that doesn't tap for mana. It just says, tap to reduce target flying creature's power to 0. But I've built this into a deck myself where I have Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, as well as Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, so this thing can tap for Swamp, I can tap for Forest. It has options available, which is kind of crazy. And if Wizards ever completes that land cycle, it's going to just be epically powerful. But that's where you're going. Cards like this that can reduce creatures' attacking power, like Maze of Ith, creature doesn't attack. Those type of lands, and the fact they actually make them tap for mana as well, just added another layer that Wizards thinks about and builds into their creations. But they always will look back on the success of the original powerhouse cards that were created in the original iteration of the game, the original beginning power level. And that's never been replicated the same way. But they have options available to allow them to do it. Now, here's Diamond Valley, okay? I want you to look at this card for a second. Again, it doesn't, it's kind of interesting, right? It doesn't tap for mana. Tap to sacrifice one of your creatures in exchange for a number of life points equal to its toughness. Note, this ability may be used after blocking has been declared. I guess they were kind of worried about how people would take the rules. Kind of weird back in the day. But this kind of card, again, with the newer mana bases, kind of makes it multi-use, which is amazing. Cards that came afterwards, think about Arabian Nights, first expansion ever. Later on, City of Shadows. Similar game effects, right? But instead of getting life, you get counter tokens on it that tap for mana. They followed a certain game plan back then. And although the game plan has changed, there's nothing stopping them from going back and looking at cards like this to get the ideas, the inspiration they need to build new creations. And because they can make it a colorless land, they can make sure, just like they had Urza's Factory, right? They finally built Urza's Factory. Those kind of hiccup cards where you're not sure what's going to happen can be built upon later based on original powerhouse cards that can never be replicated due to the power level that you get when you play a vintage legacy game, kitchen table Magic. I gotta say, guys, building with these things is just never duplicated. Now, the next card, and this is the key. We are talking dual lands. Ever since these cards were created and put on the reserve list, because they are the best they've ever built as far as they're concerned, they've looked at ways of recreating these. In Commander, you have the bond lands, right? The Commander lands where, as long as you have more than one opponent, the land comes into play untapped. Those kind of lands exist in Commander, a casual format, which means they're not breaking a rule because it only works in that particular format, but that's where they can go. They can do this for other formats. They can do this for other creations, and they do have fast lands and check lands and slow lands. They've built around it. They tried with the depletion, which was a failure. Although I still have ideas about them, they're still a failure in the eyes of most people. These cards are where everything is built from, which is why everyone wants dual lands. That's why they're always going to be valuable. That's why whenever you see these things on sale, you should be buying them. You should be holding these cards. That's where my opinion falls on them, because they'll never be replicated the same way. They just won't be. And I can't see, anybody banning them in every format, so they're going to be played. And even if they were banned, unless you're at a tournament, it really doesn't matter. So cards like this, you just have to pay attention to it. Mishras Workshop. I remember when they did the Christmas card. Mishras Toy Workshop. Very interesting, funny card. But when you look at a card like this and realize it's almost $4,000, it's been as high as $5,000, $6,000 for graded copies. Because it comes into play. Doesn't come into play tapped, and tapped to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. This mana can only be used to cast artifacts. Think about Brothers War. Think about Antiquities. Think about any set that has been artifact heavy like Mirrodin. Think about those sets. Mirrodin Besiege. Think about artifact sets. Think about things in Phyrexia. Guys, this card is a power that just hasn't really been met with the same level as other cards, where they haven't really recreated it the same way. They'd like to. Like you saw the new Urza land, right? Urza's Workshop. So watered down. But the inspiration came from Mishra's Workshop. That's where it came from. And although I like the idea of it and the nostalgia, I know it's a watered down version, but I still appreciate the effort and inspiration they put into it. It's nowhere near as good as original. I always want to get another original of these, and I want to hold a copy if I ever get to finish an antiquity set years down the road, but that's where people go. You can't make it as good as the original, which is why these have such value and always will. Now our last card, Library of Alexandria. Okay, Library of Alexandria is, it still is. Like when I play this card, it's got to be dealt with right away, or I'm just going to start drawing like a madman. Tap to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or draw a card from your library. You can only use it if you have exactly 7 cards in your hand. So we used to like come into play, not do anything, or like Ancestral Recall, whatever you could to get to 7 cards. Lay Moxes, all that stuff. And then you just start drawing. Now, they have tried. Now, of course, with Library of Alexandria, they've already given us a copy as well, a watered down version. They gave us the Bibloplex, okay? And that card, of course, is from Strixhaven. Here, I'll stand over here so you guys can see this. Now, you see it taps for mana, pay 2, look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may reveal that card and put it into your hand. If you don't put that card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Activate only if you have exactly 0 or exactly 7 cards. That Bibloplex, which is a watered down version of Library of Alexandria, is like a 12-cent card. I remember it being $5. I bought a ton of copies. I thought it was going to go somewhere. I still call it a hiccup because with enough instants or sorceries or ways of drawing, this card still allows you to kind of scry and look ahead and see what's going on. It fits into any deck because it's colorless to use it. And depending on the build, a card like this can be a late game life-saving card to top draw. Still love the card. Still think it has places to go. A lot of people would disagree, saying it's too watered down and too weak, but Wizards can still draw inspiration from cards like this and give us different iterations with slightly different mechanic builds. Maybe it says you have a creature card instead of an instant or sorcery. They can reword things with the same type of land to give you a different game effect depending on the build they're using. And that's what I'm talking about in the game. The most powerful cards are in the past. They can't bring those back without breaking the reserve list, and I doubt that's ever actually going to happen. But they can give us the watered down versions going forward. And if they want success, a properly inspired, good iteration of one of these cards with a moderately to good power level based on the set can secure a success inside of a set just with a good mana base. That's what I'm talking about going forward. Don't be surprised if Modern Horizons 3 gives us really good mana bases. They haven't announced anything yet, but don't be surprised. Look for those cards. Look for those key go-getters. And if you have them already, if you have some of these amazing cards, I hope you hold on to them. If you're a person who's seeking out some of these old amazing cards like Library of Alexandria, you're going for a City of Shadows, whatever it may be, Soldevi Excavations maybe from back in the day, Castle Vantris, by the way, from Eldraine, total copy card, that kind of stuff, then hey, it's amazing, it's great to have. They are definite holds for long term though, because they're not coming around the reserve list cards. And if you do happen to buy any of these, if you're looking to buy some of these cards, and you happen to take a look at my description, you'll see I have a TCG affiliate link. Please, if you get a chance, use that affiliate link before buying. Just click on the link. It'll take you to TCG Player and you can start your shopping experience. But my channel gets a kickback every time you guys buy there. I get a little taste of that pie and I get a little bit so I can get cards for the channel as well. And I appreciate everyone who does it every month because those $20, $30, they add up, guys. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for hanging out with me on the channel. And what do you guys think? What do you think Wizards is going to do? What card do you think will come back around in a new form? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. Nothing's as good as the original, but they do try. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys tomorrow. A big shout out and thank you to all the fantastic patrons on this channel. As the supporters of this channel, this content is not made possible without that support. So for everyone who takes the time to support my channel, I thank you. I still think this is going somewhere. Welcome back to the end. I still think, I was buying these full art foil ones for like $1 a piece. I bought a whole bunch. I'm telling you, I still think these kind of hiccup things like this have somewhere to go because they fit anywhere. They don't tap for a color. You can get anything you need. If you put it in Yavimaya Cradle of Growth deck, well, Yavimaya lets you tap this for green. You put it with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, it can tap for black, depending on what you're doing with it, right? And it lets you still look at your deck for 2. Lets you scry ahead. I think it's an underestimated thing. I wonder if it'll ever take off. I don't know. I mean, they've made the game so fast. for tournament play that's over in turn 4 and 5, but more casual builds, commander stuff, you never know what's going to happen. I love that card. Anyway, thanks for being here. Let's put down, let's go with it, Soldevi Excavations for the comment section, so I know you made it this far. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Thanks for being here. Boomstick, but hey, Soldevi Excavations.